This podcast is powered by the pros at Paschal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPaschal.com.
Brett, always appreciate you joining us. Where are you today?
Trying to sneak up and see the Royals and Guards tonight before a little Diamondbacks, A's, and Caitlin Clark this weekend. So I'm cramming as much into this week and beyond as I possibly can.
Man, I thought I don't stay in one place for more than a day. Then I met you. I've known you for a long time, but, man, you are on some kind of a tour this summer.
Hey, why not? Colin's like 4 softball games in Colorado next week, and then we've got some baseball events at the Diamondback Stadium. So, might as well stay busy around the holiday, I guess. So looking forward to a few games around all of the other games.
So I see you're going to see Michael Wacha pitching for the Royals today.
Right.
That's a former Texas A&M guy, right? And he's from Iowa City, so I mean that plays two ways for you here. You've sat and spoken with Jim Schlossnagel before. So when you saw what happened Monday and Tuesday, what was your reaction?
I was surprised in so many ways. I feel like I know him pretty well, Phil, and his teams have been in these college classic events that I've called for a decade. So I get a chance to sit down with him for 25, 30 minutes and really kind of pick his brain. I always felt like he was maybe the most media-savvy coach. Now, that doesn't mean anything to the fans. For you and I, it might be. He might say, hey, you haven't asked me about my left fielder. You should. He's going to be an impactful player, and here's why. And I appreciate that. And one time I think he told me growing up in North Carolina, he wanted to call basketball games on the radio. That was a passion of his. And I say all of that because I would not have expected him to kind of bungle what he did in that press conference as badly as it came out. And I understand the rawness of playing a game in a national championship game 20 minutes before and then having that question asked, but you have to be prepared for that. And spending a lot of time in Houston, I know a lot of Longhorn fans, but for every Longhorn fan I know 10 Aggie fans. And their reaction to me is, we would have won a natty with Schlossnagel had he stayed, and I kind of agree with them. And losing our coach hurts. Losing our coach to Texas really hurts. But that press conference is going to be something they're going to talk about for the next 15 years. I don't know how you quite kind of move past that without the benefit of time.
Well, and just reading some of the comments, even just from Travis Chestnut right now, and some of the things that I've just heard in other conversations about him, and I just wonder sometimes about this. I have personal relationships with the coaches that I work with, so I feel like I have a sense of who they are. But when you're a broadcaster and you're doing like a pre-series meeting with somebody, or just like a phone call or a presser or something like that, sometimes I wonder if you're getting a certain part of that person's personality, and it's not the same kind of personality that you get if you're playing for that person. And that's how this is coming across from Schlossnagel. It's almost like he's got 2 or 3 faces.
It's possible. Obviously as media members, we like people that are helpful to us, and we don't necessarily care as much about how that translates into a clubhouse per se. This is a guy, though, Phil, in the last 10 years has taken teams to 6 College World Series. I don't know if there's anybody else out there in this time frame that's at that number. I don't think so. Maybe over the last 10 years there's been nobody that's gone to 6 of these. So he's had success. I think the part, though, that kind of jumps out to me, and I think we talk about it, but I think there's a little fear of kind of jumping too far deep into this. I mean, it's been a known fact, I think, that David Pierce was not going to maintain his job for 2 or 3 weeks at Texas. And to not fire a coach when you don't want to have him back during the most important weeks of the year seems really strange, unless you already have your candidate in mind, because you don't want to fire somebody, have everybody jump in the portal, and be asked why you aren't hiring somebody while you're obviously just waiting and watching for A&M. There were a lot of conversations about maybe he was going to go get Vitello after the College World Series. And then finally Monday, when that announcement came out, and Dave even referenced this yesterday, he felt like he's known that Pierce wasn't coming back for a long time. Then all of a sudden there were a couple of reports out from people that were talking to others that Del Conte had interacted with, saying he was going to Omaha and he wasn't coming back without Schlossnagel. So if this thing had been in the works in one way, shape, or form for the last 3 weeks, that's where I think the kids get frustrated, because they're trying to win a natty. You might have one foot kind of out of the door. You're considering other options, and they're thinking about coming back next year, and you're thinking about being in Austin. I think that's where it really gets problematic. But then again, we've seen it 100 different times in college sports in different aspects. It's just front and center with us because it's one of the more high-profile programs in the highest-profile conference.
Well, and we also have this, question: do athletes commit to schools or they commit to coaches? And I think in some athletes' eyes, it can sometimes be a little bit of both, or maybe a little bit more one or the other. And this will be a fascinating sort of experiment to see about that, because I just imagine that there would be some parents that look at the way that he went out there and think, that's not a very trustworthy person. I don't know if I would trust my son to play for him. But then just like you'd mentioned, 6 times to Omaha, bunch of guys in the big leagues. That also speaks very loudly, and the money that Texas has too. So, I mean, I'd expect that. I think he'll get Texas. I don't know if they'll get him to a national championship, but I'd be surprised if he doesn't have success there too.
No, I think he will. It's just a question of how quickly. And I think part of how quickly a success will come is how many players, if any, he can bring from A&M. And I'm with you. That's the subplot now with Chase Lavalette going into the portal. You don't put your head in the pillow as a diehard Aggie one night and wake up the next day and say, I'm all in on the Longhorns. However, we're in a different world, because 2 or 3 years ago that would have been crazy to think. But now we know Lavalette, who's a potential 1-1 next year in the draft, and there aren't many guys walking around the planet that can say that. This is a 9-month commitment. And, Dave was throwing out numbers in his presser yesterday. The top players are going for $400,000. So if Texas offers him $500,000, would he go? Oh, and if not, how many teams are there, hello LSU, that can offer $500,000 to a player, even though he could change the dynamics of their season? That's the fascinating aspect, because this guy is a legit talent. And I think there's probably 3 schools in the country that could afford him. And if he wants to leave Texas A&M, would he dare follow his coach because he's getting $500,000, or would he say, I'm better off going someplace else, because it's going to be a transfer within the SEC? He's not going to the Big 12. He's not going to the ACC, and there aren't a ton of teams in this conference that can pay somebody $500,000.
Yeah, and I don't think Arkansas is one of those teams.
I don't either.
I mean, you can sort of tell based on the where they're getting their players to come in from the transfer portal. And I'm not saying they're going bargain hunting, because I think they're getting some really good ball players. It's just they haven't had an SEC to SEC transfer. I mean, I know you got this kid, Justin Thomas, that's coming in from Florida Southwestern College. He had started his career at Georgia. That's not the same thing. That's not transferring from Georgia to Arkansas. And
Dave even mentioned it yesterday, Phil. I mean, he used the word budget at one point, and he also said, and I think this is still music to my ears in a sense, he goes, we're still going to build through incoming freshmen. And there are very few programs in the country where culture is the same now as it was 3 years ago. The reason why it is at Arkansas is because they've kept their entire staff together. They've kept their pitching coach. They've kept their hitting coordinator and their recruiting guy and their head coach. And for the most part, you're seeing movement everywhere else in this conference. So you might see coaches come or go or whatnot. They've kept it together. So continuity and culture is still important to them. I think they understand they have to go and augment here or there. But as far as being a freewheeling team willing to spend like an LSU or like an A&M or Texas at this point, I just don't get the sense that they're quite there. And listen, if they can figure out how this works without just going out and buying players every year, I think it's more sustainable in the long run to do it that way. But it always concerns you because Texas shouldn't be competitive next year, losing their coach and losing some players and recruits. If they want to go out and spend $3 million, they can be competitive at a hurt.
Well, they brought in a whole new baseball coaching staff, and I'd forgotten what had happened with the Texas baseball staff in the last 2-3 years. Just a lot of comings and a lot of goings, and they were successful on the field. I mean, they didn't get to Omaha, but they had 2 years in a row that were not bad seasons. It's just there was a lot of changeover as far as the assistant coaching staff was concerned. And then,
you're right. And the other part, though, Phil, is you have to compare them to their neighbor. I mean, it's one thing when you're not going to Omaha, and I think they've been there 38 times in their time frame. That's an absurd number. But all of a sudden, it's not that they're just not getting there. Their biggest rival is and competing for championships. So they base themselves on how they're going up against Texas A&M, and they've fallen behind in that regard. So that itself probably worthy for a change. The funny part is they owe Pierce $1.6 million if they don't mitigate it. There was a buyout for Schlossnagel, and because there was an extra clause, if he went to another school in Texas, and there's only one he would go to, it's $2.5 million. They have to spend $4 million before they even give Schlossnagel a dime or give a player a dime. But I'm guessing it doesn't impact them because, they want to get back ahead of A&M, and I suppose the best way to do that quickly is to take their coach and maybe some of their players.
These athletic units, these new teams coming into the SEC, they're looking to project stability with sports that matter to them. And look, Sark is as stable as it gets right now at Texas for football. You don't have to worry about that. And I think the same with Skip Johnson at Oklahoma with baseball. But you look at what Texas has done with their baseball. Look at what Oklahoma did just re-signing or extending Brent Venables only after just 2 years. And that's I don't think that has anything to do about what happened last year with Venables or anything. I think it's just a matter of we're going into a new league. We have to project stability.
Yeah, and you have to pay the going rate, and there's a different rate between the Big 12 and the SEC. Wes Johnson had his contract reworked yesterday and adding several years and dollars to it, and that projects stability, but obviously Oklahoma had to do the same thing. I think the one thing we get caught up in this new world, and again, I'm not a fan of this just buying players and coaches and the exorbitant rates. I keep going back to Tennessee, and I still think there's something there, whether we just talked about Arkansas. You look at Tony Vitello, and ESPN did a nice picture where they put him and Schlossnagel from the TCU team picture. Well, they went to 4 straight College World Series, largely based on players he recruited. Vitello comes here. Had Arkansas had a 2020 season and gone to the College World Series, that would have been 3 straight years to the Omaha with players largely recruited by Vitello. He goes to Tennessee. The last 4 years, as the head of that program, they win more games than anybody else in the national championship. It still matters about getting good players. But, we've gotten a little bit away from just simply recruiting, and we're trying to outspend teams, and I think that's where some schools and some programs are going to implode if they don't have the right guy leading the charge.
Last thing, it's about Heston Kjerstad, 0 for 3 yesterday for Baltimore against the Cleveland Guardians. And, I imagine Baltimore has him on the trading block. They need a little pitching. He's their top position player prospect. I think they brought him up to hopefully, in their mind, show other teams that this is somebody that will stick in the big leagues. And I think eventually Heston will. Does he get traded off of Baltimore this year?
It's funny you say that. I was thinking that a couple of days ago. 2 or 3 days ago, he had a great game, couple of doubles, even had a 12 or 13 pitch at bat where he was getting a standing ovation, and then he ended up flying out or making it out in the 9th inning. I think he can play. I'm sure you do too, and I would love to see him get an opportunity. And I think it's only a matter of time. Baltimore's loaded with outfielders like Colton Cowser, who kind of passed him when Heston had his health injuries. So I think that's the case. I think they could get a ton for this guy too. You get a top prospect who's big league ready. At least it feels like that. It ought to be worth several players, or certainly an impactful pitcher. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. And I just hope for Heston's sake, it's a good opportunity for him to play on a regular basis going forward and not kind of go through what he's been this year, going up and down. And when he's been up, he hasn't played a ton because, quite frankly, they've got a very talented position player nucleus.
BetOnline is your #1 source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your phone. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts.